So
Yeah,
welcome everyone to this Cybersecurity magazine. I'm Philippa Jefferies and I'm here with Philip Ingram, MBE from Grey Hair Media. And today we are chatting about security in nation states, the power of information, and the upcoming Cyber Expo in September. So welcome, Philip. Thank you so much for joining me today.
hey, good to be with you, Philippa.
Can you perhaps start by introducing yourself a little bit and your background?
Yeah, well, a lot of people may have seen me on their televisions or
Hmm.
hear me on radio or see my commentary in the newspapers or magazines. I'm now a journalist that specializes in everything security, so
Hmm.
cyber, counterterrorism, and I keynote speak in cyber across the globe. And touch a little bit on defense and other things. But that's because of my background. I was a senior intelligence officer in
Hmm.
the British Army, leaving as a full colonel, and spent 26 years looking at all of these things from an intelligence perspective, now from a journalist perspective. So is that
Hmm.
gamekeeper turned poacher or poacher turned gamekeeper?
Yeah, and to start with, I guess you've spoken a lot about nation states and the threats they pose. I was hoping to start by just chatting a little bit about this when it comes to cybersecurity specifically, and kind of what extent are nation states themselves performing cyber attacks or things like that, or sponsored nation state sponsored attacks.
Well, nation states, it's one of those cries that we hear all of the time. Oh, it's a nation state attack, it's this, it's that, it's the other.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden you get the mandiant numbers come in, oh, it's APT1 or APT whatever. And then people come in with their fancy bears and other titles. And it's very difficult actually to work out who's doing what, where, when.
Hmm.
Um, but nation states are very real and huge operators within the cyber environment. Balancing them off against cyber criminals, against
Hmm.
script kiddies, I would probably say that the greatest threat is nation states because they sponsor a lot of the cyber criminals who are within those state environments, and I can expand on that if necessary. And they certainly have got more resources that they'll throw at things. So, say for example, China's quoted often.
Hmm.
APT1 in the Mandiant terms is really China's People Liberations Army Unit 61398, and there's sort of I think 29 different APTs associated with China, and they tend to focus either geographically or subject matters on the sorts of things that they're trying to do. A lot of other threats come out of Russia. We hear of
Hmm.
Iran. We hear of North Korea. North Korea is interesting in that, how can a country where people don't grow up with the internet, they don't have access to computers, they don't have academics who understand IT and computers and computing and the latest trends, how can they all of a sudden become such an adept nation in dealing with things? And there are only two internet routes in and out of North Korea,
Hmm.
one supplied by China, one supplied by Russia. So are they a plausibly deniable outlet for cyber bad boys if they want to do that? Possibly. But the nation state threats are very, very real indeed. And each different nation has got a slightly different target set that they're looking for.
Okay, and moving on from that kind of target set, what kind of I was hoping you could expand on kind of the motivations for some of these nation states and whether they're the same or they're very different. Um,
They're very different. It's all in effect. And I'll start off
mhm.
with China again. The one thing that drives China with everything is economics, economics,
Mhm.
economics. If that's not three things, um, and that's because what they're trying to do is gain economic advantage for China, and that
Sure.
means that what are they trying to do? They're trying to target companies where they can steal the intellectual property from those companies. And why do they want to steal the intellectual property? Well, it saves them billions of dollars in research themselves if they can just take plans that are already mature, that are out there, that says how to manufacture something, whether that be a new bit of technology, whether it be a new drug, whether it be something else. They'll take those plans and they'll try and then replicate that and get it out into market quicker than
Mhm.
those that have put all the design in, and also cheaper because they're not having to add into the manufacturing costs the development costs, and that's why in many cases they try and undercut a lot of the technologies that we're seeing out elsewhere. And then around the economics, it's all the politics that are associated with that
Mhm.
China's interested in. So where governments are making big economic decisions. And then from a wider geographic perspective, it's threats that they perceive to China. So the Chinese are focused very much on the Uyghur diaspora across the world, and those that might be supporting them. And remember, that's the oppressed people inside China, principally of Muslim faith, that have education and rehabilitation camps that they're put into, and anything that threatens that side of things. Whereas if you get to Russia, who's probably the other major player that's in there, Russia is very much focused on the political sphere and political influence, and trying to influence what is going on in Western elections, in what's going on in Western business decisions, and also interested in defence. So anything that there is to do with defence, and we see lots of different attacks coming out of Russia and elsewhere, and we've seen the use of potential cyber weapons in the past. In 2017, we saw NotPetya and WannaCry. The NotPetya unit from Russia was that prosecuted that attack was a GRU unit, and the GRU are Russia's first directorate, their military intelligence service. They're a bit like a combination between sort of special forces, CIA, MI6, and a little bit more. But the unit that did that was GRU Unit 74455, and they had originally set it as a military target. They'd put the malware in an application that was targeted at Ukraine, interestingly, into the Ukraine businesses through a bit of accounting software that they all had to use, but then it escaped into the wild, and we know the effects that had across the world. But it also broke an awful lot of Russian computers inside the Russian Ministry of Defense, which is why you were not necessarily seeing as much cyber activity at the scales we potentially expected whenever Russia re-invaded Ukraine. And then Iran, North Korea. In North Korea, we've seen the Sunni hacked. Iran, we keep hearing of attacks into Saudi and into other parts of the Middle East and out towards the United States. Again, political, military influence in what we're trying to do. So the target sets are very different. The activity is huge.
Yeah, and you've been in this industry a long time, not just cybersecurity, but security in general. I was wondering, how have you kind of seen nation-state threats and cyber attacks from nation-states develop over the last few years? Like, obviously, they're becoming more prevalent as now we digitize everything, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on how it's developed.
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer because cyber itself has been developing continuously, and it's the effort that's put into it. And it's interesting to see some of the tools that are being used. I didn't, when I was mentioning the nation states, I didn't mention the United States, United Kingdom, some of the European nations, all the rest of it, because they're as active in the cyber environment as elsewhere. And some of the tools that we're seeing China and Russia turning around and using on a global basis are tools that they have stolen from or were leaked from US cyber organizations, and it's the Eternal Blue tool set that's there, and we're seeing those being recoded and turned around and turned back on us again. The Iranians have been very successful in taking the Stuxnet malware that attacked their nuclear centrifuges and was almost certainly a US Israeli or a US only or as Israeli only, but it was a nation state attack against Iran. But they've taken that malware and recoded it in ways to use it very successfully against Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Aramco attack, and others. So as the cyber environment develops, so does the attack methodologies in many ways. All of the old methodologies still work because a lot of the old vulnerabilities are still there. We've seen an increase in the zero-day marketplace across the globe and people buying zero-day exploits and then using those. And then we're seeing new environments, and the new environments tie in with what's coming in the metaverse. And there's a lot more going to happen in there. Through all of this, we've seen a ramping up, an increase of exploitations in what I call the information environment. So information exploitations, because I remember as a child, I go to tell my mother that I'd been called names in the playground at school, and she'll say, "Oh, don't worry, sticks and stones will break your bones, but
Hmm.
words will never harm you." Well, that's wrong. Your words can kill.
Definitely. And going back to a bit what you were saying about how cybersecurity and cyber attacks have developed in this area, I was wondering how specifically nation state attacks vary compared to kind of individual or small group attacks, and how easy is it to kind of determine what really is a nation state threat?
Well, the methodologies that they use, certainly at the lower levels, are exactly the same. So
Hmm.
you'll get phishing, you'll get spear phishing, you'll get deliberate denial of service attacks to force
Yeah.
people onto other means, and those are means that are exploited. And interestingly, I was doing some research for a keynote speech I did in Finland a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to know when the first nation-state deliberate denial of service attack was,
Hmm.
and it shocked me when I found out what it was. It happened on the 5th of August, 1914, not even 2000. The 5th of August,
Okay.
1914. It was the first aggressive act by the British in the First World War, whenever an Inspector Bordeaux of British intelligence boarded the cable ship Alert and went out into the middle of the English Channel
Hmm.
and cut 4 of the 5 cables carrying telegram traffic from continental Europe across the rest of the globe. Left the 5th cable because the 5th cable
Yeah.
went through the UK, and British intelligence had already tapped into it and broken the codes on it. And German government had to communicate with its embassies either using high frequency radio, which again the British could intercept and
Hmm.
broken the codes on, or this one final cable that was there. And that led to the interception of what was known as the Zimmermann telegram. And that, for the historical aficionados out there, is the telegram that was used to bring the United States into the First World War. So
Hmm.
we've got a denial of service attack forcing someone onto another means that you've already got an exploit on it, and
Yeah.
that's a methodology that we see today across the board. So they use just about everything that they can. The thing that nation states bring in are the ability to prosecute much more sophisticated attacks, because they can bring an awful lot of resources together to ensuring that whenever they're getting into different exploits and everything else, that they are much more sophisticated than you'd find out of a criminal organization, who are, criminal organizations have got one motivation: money, 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 money.
Hmm.
The script kiddie side of things, who tend to be the ones that find the 0 days in many cases, because it's seen as a challenge. So it's interesting, and ever changing.
Yeah, definitely. And that's amazing that denial of service started such a long time ago, but is now still one of the key
Exactly.
ways of attack.
Exactly.
And you kind of brushed upon this as a point that as part of those kind of threats on nation states and security and cybersecurity is the power of information, protecting information, finding information. Um, how important is that kind of in today's climate, today's threat landscape, this kind of transfer of information between the nation states?
Well, the transfer of information, first of all, a lot of nation states are after the intercepted information.
Hmm.
Whenever China wants intellectual property, that's information, that's data. It wants to
Hmm.
go out and steal it. The Russians want information because that information is used to process into intelligence that gives them economic views and all the rest of it. But they're also very good at weaponizing it. Now, we often heard Donald Trump talking fake news. Uh,
Hmm.
and fake news as the weaponization of what was being seen in the media. It's nothing new. The great Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, in the 6th century, in his book The Art of War, wrote, "All warfare is deception, all deception is warfare."
Hmm.
Paraphrased it slightly, and my ancient Chinese is not that good. But deception ties in with misinformation, disinformation, and everything else, and we see a lot of it. Misinformation is incorrect information that is accidentally put out there. You don't know it's wrong. You're putting it out there because you think it might be right, and you're letting people know, but it's not a deliberate act. Disinformation, however, is a deliberate act. You know that
Okay.
what you're putting out there is wrong, and you're trying to have an effect. And that effect could be to try and influence people's thinking or anything else. And there's some very sophisticated research, and on my own website, greyhairmedia.com, I've got a blog I did a couple of years ago on hacking your serotonin. And it looks at how you can take sort of aggressive marketing techniques, but then if you apply big data where you understand an individual and an individual's influences, and I include their friends and their friends' influences and family influences in an awful lot of detail, you can then start to feed information in a way through social media that will certainly influence the way people think. And research has shown that you can actually change the way people think. And part of the reason for that is we all carry mobile devices now, mobile phones, where your data is fed to you through so many different means continuously. And therefore people, whenever you're looking at it, how quick do you scroll through Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or anything else? And as you're scrolling through, people are making assessments as to what they're saying. They're replying very quickly. And actually, when you think about it, people aren't really thinking about what they're saying. So it's much more of an environment where it can be influenced by organizations that are feeding you something that maybe you do think about and it supports what you've done and all the rest of it. And then with social media, there's another bit that comes into it often where I call it self-misinforming groupthink. And, a lot of people on their social media feeds will be turning around and looking at what's coming in, and you have a bit of a social media spat with someone where they disagree with what you're saying, and it gets to the point where you block them.
Yeah.
And then you do the same, and someone else comes and you think, oh, I disagree with you, you block them. And you do that, and then all of a sudden, after sort of a few weeks or so, you suddenly see that in your feed, everyone's agreeing with you, and that reinforces what it is. I must be right. Everyone's agreeing with me, but the reason why they're agreeing with you is you blocked all of the alternatives, and therefore
you're in an echo chamber, right?
You're in an echo chamber, and you're getting that groupthink going. So that is known by nation states and is exploited. The Russians have got a doctrine called Maskirovka. Brilliant word. My Russian pronunciation is probably way off if there's any Russian speakers listening in, but Maskirovka means masking, literally masking, and therefore it's masking the truth by putting bits of disinformation around to try and cause doubt in people's minds as to what the accuracy is and the reality is behind something. And we saw that in a few years ago with the Russian nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Immediately after it happened, and the then Prime Minister Theresa May stood up in the British Parliament and said it was the Russians that did it. Vladimir Putin stood up and said it wasn't, not in Parliament, but he put a press comment out saying it couldn't have been us. It definitely wasn't us. It must have escaped from the British chemical warfare establishment at Porton Down, which is just outside Salisbury. And then listening to that, the next day the leader of the opposition stood up in Parliament when debating what Theresa May had said and said, we must check and see that it didn't escape from the chemical warfare establishment at Porton Down, because how do we know it was definitely the Russians? To my mind, Vladimir Putin was sitting in Moscow behind his great big oak desk with a very large glass of vodka over ice in the best Russian crisp, with a big white cat on his knee as he was stroking it, going, yes, look, that's worked, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it's this kind of information that we have now, and social media and this environment online now can be used definitely aggressively by other nation states.
And it is used aggressively. It is used to influence elections. It is used to influence the way people think, and it's done in a very sophisticated way. You have to look at who funds a lot of the information videos that come out and get circulated around, and the more viral they get, the better. And then within that, there's wider app security. So whether those apps are used to influence the messaging that's coming in, and that combined with big data, or the apps are used for other nefarious purposes, that's certainly going on as well.
Okay, and having looked at the issues, now perhaps moving on to security and what we can be doing to help counter this a little bit, though I imagine it's very difficult with the widespread use of the internet, especially in the West.
It is. I think it's more a cultural thing than a technical thing, and
Okay.
therefore I think any solutions that are out there are relatively they're relatively straightforward to describe. They're not relatively straightforward to implement because changing culture and changing the way people think
Hmm.
is always extremely difficult, especially when that's informed by society. And it's not just individuals; it's a societal thing. If you look at wider cyberspace, and one of the things I describe to people is in the physical environment, you know when to close the curtains in your room before you do anything.
Hmm.
You know when to close the front door of your house when you do anything. You know when to lock that door in your house and to lock the windows or anything else. You know when to lock something in a cabinet and all the rest of it. So that's all physical security. We know intuitively how to do that because we can see the potential threats and we're aware of them that's going on. But that doesn't seem to happen in cyberspace. People will do things online, they'll post things online, they'll send something in a message to someone else
Hmm.
that they don't know what the route is and who can see that and all the rest of it because they believe it will be secure and all the rest of it. They'll do stuff that they would never, ever, ever, ever consider doing in their back garden, never mind in the reception area of the local supermarket as you go through the
Sure.
doors. Yet it's exposed and they don't know who can exploit it and who can see it and all the rest of it, and people seem surprised. So I think people need to be aware of and take ownership of their digital visibility and digital vulnerabilities within that. And then we've got into the cultural bit of understanding that the threats are out there, and this is an education piece. It's getting
Mm.
people to properly understand that the threats are out there and where you sit in that sphere of potentially being targeted by nation states, by criminals, by script kiddies, or anything else. Um, and then when you understand that, properly putting it into context and in a business environment, putting it into context in your risk register so that you're looking at it and you're taking all of the methodology that you need to try and mitigate that risk. And most of it is just awareness and making awareness
Hmm.
amongst your staff and everything else. And again, the information sphere comes into this. One of the biggest areas that can be damaged when it comes to information getting out, the wrong information getting out, is a brand reputation. And if that
Sure.
brand reputation is damaged, how much could that potentially influence the turnover of a business? And we look at things like that. I remember a few years ago the TalkTalk breach where data was leaked and everything else. And in the back of my mind, when I look at people saying, I'll give you the best broadband deal, and the TalkTalk leaflet comes through, immediately I go, oh, no, oh, I remember that.
Hmm.
That was the brand reputation stopping me doing business with them. How many other thousands and thousands of people is it stopping and doing that? And therefore, if you look at this from a brand reputation perspective, you can then put a cost against it and look at your information policies. Who monitors what is going out in social media from workforces and from within your building? Whose responsibility is it? Is it a
Hmm.
cyber responsibility, or is it your comms team responsibility, or is it someone else's responsibility? A lot of companies probably haven't even thought of it as a risk, but I think
Hmm.
it is, and because it's transmitted over excuse me, many things that you fall into the cyber area. I think the cyber teams have to be part of it. So
Hmm.
it's fascinating. There's lots
Yeah.
to be done, and I wouldn't automatically go for a technical solution.
Okay. Yeah, it's something we discuss a lot as Cybersecurity Magazine is cybersecurity awareness and also kind of responsibility, where that falls, whether it's on the individual to, monitor their own activity, like you were saying on social media and things, just to be aware, or is it down to, like you say, companies, cybersecurity teams? Um, it's an interesting question, especially when it comes down to it's not really a technical thing, but a cultural thing.
And,
Um,
and, and therefore, because of that, I look at it from the risk perspective, and the
mhm.
risk perspective is to the business.
Yeah.
The damage is going to come in, and that's potentially going to affect the bottom line of the business, whether that be reputational damage, whether that be having to pay fines because you've had a data breach, and it's regulatory damage, which will have a reputational aspect to it,
Hmm.
or whether it's anything else. It doesn't matter. It's a business risk, and therefore it has to start at the top. It's the CEO and the board who are responsible. And within that, I think there has to be a culture where you generate a community of responsibility. So everyone within the organization is responsible for cyber, because people connect. People are the ones that are downloading something from the internet. They're opening an email with a link in it and making a decision as to whether to click on that link or not. And this is where you've got an awareness through education, and you've got a culture of, if someone gets something wrong, they've got the ability to go, oh, I've got this wrong. Is there any damage done? And be able to ask. And there's not a culture of blame coming in. There's not a culture of punishment coming in. There's a culture of saying, oh, thank you. You've helped mitigate the risk, because we all move so fast that we will make mistakes. You know, a friend of mine was the CISO of a company, and he'd got a penetration testing team to come in and look at things, and he'd given them a series of serials to look through, and one of the serials was spear phishing, and it was coming in, and he knew that they were going to come in over a 2 or 3 day period. He was sitting there, come in the morning, made his coffee, his phone had gone off, he'd got an email coming in there was someone knocking at the door, he was trying to answer all of it at once, opened up an email from the CEO and clicked on it, and looked at it, and all of a sudden his screen went blank. He was the first person in the company to fall for the red team spear phishing attack that he had set up. And if you've got people who are within the business can fall for it, so that cultural bit is really important, and better it's reported and dealt with rather than people try to hide from it.
Yeah, and it's knowing what to do, what not to do, but also who to go to and what to do once something happens. Once you've opened that email and you've realised, I shouldn't have done that.
The culture of talking about it, and you can always have a laugh, and it always gives you lots of good stories then over a beer, a glass of wine, or a cup of coffee.
But yeah, people in the company need to be prepared in order to protect against that. Okay, I'm afraid we're kind of coming to the end of our time now. It's been really interesting to talk to you. But finally, towards the end of September, you're part of the International Cyber Expo in London. Would you like to end just by talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, 27th, 28th September at Olympia in London, free to attend. And International Cyber Expo, it says Expo, there's an Expo bit to it, but there's a separate Cyber Summit, and I'm putting the content of the summit together, and it's completely free. It is designed to try and get senior people out of their offices, because the content's good and the high level speakers are good. Last year, the Chief Information Security Officer of Oxford University came along to it, and I asked him why he spent 2 days there, and he said he spent 2 days there because he got all of the CPD that he needed in one go, and he could then go and pick and choose the vendors that he wanted to talk to, and then send all of the 15 or 20 vendor emails a day he gets straight to junk, because he could get that done in a 2 day period. And we're hitting that sort of level. So from the National Cybersecurity Centre, looking at national policies, hopefully trying to get DCMS in to talk about it on the government side, but then drilling into a lot of the detail that's out there, from the regular type of attacks that we're seeing, a nation state attack understanding, getting into DDoS and all of the other types of attacks, but then trying to approach things from slightly different angles. So there'll be bits in it on quantum computing, there'll be bits in it on and blockchain. There'll be quite a bit in on the importance of diversity within the cyber environment that we're looking at, and women in cyber, as well as a number of other interesting subjects, including the legal aspects of it. I've got a barrister coming in who is one of the country's leading barristers in the cyber environment. She'd normally be charging £2,000 to £4,000 an hour, and we're getting a free half hour of her time, giving her insights into things. That has to be worth anyone's time to come and listen.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I will put links to the Cyber Expo with the podcast, and it's also on our website, on our homepage, if anyone is interested. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.